So I played Sonic Frontiers, and I've got some things to say. I don't need to introduce the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise to you. If you've clicked on this video and you somehow don't know about Sonic, I hope the retirement home is treating you well. Now, to clear some things out of the way, I am mostly just a Sonic casual these days. I did have a larger love for Sonic content when I was in primary school, but that level of fandom I had for it just isn't there anymore. I'll typically be up to date on what the next major release Sega is pushing out for the franchise is, and across all my devices, Sonic Dash has been on all of them. So, when I pick up a Sonic game these days, it's usually a while after it's been released and it's on sale. And I recently picked up Origins and Frontiers during the Steam Summer Sale that's just gone. You've read the title, you know this video is about Frontiers specifically, and I'll be honest, I had a blast playing this game. Over the past few years, I found that my preference for games happens to be massive open world experiences. And the open world experience has expanded rapidly into other franchises over the past decade, following the popularity of Skyrim and the success Nintendo found with Breath of the Wild. And Sega obviously have decided to try and experiment with the blue blur yet again to see if things stick, which, let's be real, Sonic team throwing a concept at the wall and then running with it to see if it works is something they do at least once a decade now to varying degrees of success. And to get the big question out of the way, I'd say what they've thrown at the wall this time is probably going to stick in some capacity. I'd be surprised if the next mainline game, that isn't a remaster or a remake, didn't incorporate some of the progression system elements of Frontiers into it. Now, has this game turned me into a diehard Sonic fan again? Has it reignited the passion I had for the series as a kid? No, not really. I think for the most part Frontiers is an isolated thing. Like I said, I imagine elements of the overall progression system will return in the future, but I do think most of the gameplay mechanics and this open world structure just won't. While I do love open world games and I do respect Sega for being able to pull the IP back on its feet after Sonic Forces, if we are going to get another open world game for Sonic, with all of these basic mechanics returning, I want one thing: it needs to be its own game. I've always found it funny that during the late 2000s and early 2010s, one of the things you could mock the Sonic fandom about was just the insane amount of original character do not steal type things you could see online. Hell, even where the overall image of the Sonic fandom online these days has changed, with people either moving on from the space or growing up and accepting the cringe from the past more willingly, this is still something you do see. But there's an added level of irony to it when you consider a few of the core elements of the Sonic franchise that you can't imagine it without today. They're all either heavily inspired to the point that the comparison blurs the line, or straight up is just the same thing with a different coat of paint. Now, Sonic being a Dragon Ball ripoff and taking very liberal inspiration from the Dragon Ball franchise is nothing new, and plenty of Sonic games have been made in direct response or directly inspired by other games at the time. And I need to make it abundantly clear, I'm not trying to point anything new out here, nor am I saying these games are bad because of how closely tied to other IPs they are. But what I am trying to get at here is that by far, Frontiers feels like the worst offender of this habit Sonic team have of taking very little effort to separate their concepts from respective inspirations. Now, you probably noticed I had this specific comic by Archdan in the background of the start of my intro, where the joke is how Sonic is a massive Zelda fan and wants to be like Link. Well, I imagine that most of these comparisons are just pointing out similarities. With Frontiers, it just feels accurate. I mean, an ancient race from an indeterminate amount of time before the game takes place that descended to the Earth wielding 7 identical items, but just one is enough to power up a wielder to an unbelievable degree, had access to and invented powerful technology and architecture that would later go on to inspire an equally mysterious civilization. This civilization faced a threat so big that they had to build giant machines of war piloted by chosen individuals to help in sealing it away due to its apocalyptic nature. During the events of the game, the hero needs to fight and defeat these giant mechs as the main goal of each story area, all while a voice in their head tells them to push on further. And as part of the progression system is tied to collecting these cute little things and giving them to a bigger one of those things. With one of the upgrades the bigger thing can give you is more space to hold a type of item. Now, if you really just want me to spell it out for you, this is not a fucking Sonic game. This is just Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But it's done better. Now, for 2 pages of this script, I've been somewhat taking the piss out of the Sonic franchise, the wider fandom, and the people behind the franchise itself. And while I am no more than just a casual Sonic enjoyer these days, I am a die-hard Zelda fan. and I've played through both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to completion multiple times now before picking up Frontiers. So obviously I was going to notice these suspiciously similar aspects of the game pretty quickly as the massive Zelda fan that I am. Now I admit there is no intentional way in hell that the Ancients were directly inspired by the Zonai. Both Tears and Frontiers were developed within the same time span, with Frontiers releasing 6 months before Tears did. So I think that the similarities between the Zonai with the Secret Stones and the Ancients with the Chaos Emeralds is purely coincidental. Since at least removing Tears of the Kingdom from the equations, the Ancients and their tech were probably more taken from Breath of the Wild's ancient Sheikah. But this is where my praise for Frontiers starts. Not only does Frontiers take certain parts of what Breath of the Wild did right and improve upon them where Tears of the Kingdom would fail to do so, but it also doubles down on this and gives these elements their own identity. Originally, I was working on a full-fledged review of Tears of the Kingdom, and I had a running bit in the script when, wherever I got close to mentioning the main story of the game, I'd forget to talk about it, and I'd only remember it at the very end of the video, because I wanted to address the failings of the main story of Tears of the Kingdom in its own video. And believe me, I still will make that video to some degree. But where Tears leaves things unexplained to a sickening degree, basically just telling a shittier version of Ocarina of Time story, leaving fans theorists scratching their head about what the fuck was the point, Frontiers not only feels like its story was thought through with similar elements to the point it feels original for the franchise, but it still leaves enough mystery for players to draw their own conclusions and theorize about those elements and the wider implications. To explain my point a bit further, Sonic Frontiers had a large focus on the Chaos Emeralds, and we get snippets of information telling us that they led the Ancients to Earth after sensing the Master Emerald's presence, with the Ancients seemingly not knowing about the Master Emerald's existence until sending a scouting party out to its location before the events that left the Starfall Islands abandoned. We're not told explicitly how the Ancients even found the Chaos Emeralds in the first place, or where the Emeralds came from, despite certain things in the game hinting towards those blank pieces in the story. Compare that to the core plot elements of the Zonai Secret Stones. We're given the same basic information on them and how they work, but ultimately we're left with a whole lot of nothing. We only know they increase the power of those who wield them, meaning that they themselves act as nothing more than a power boost rather than a MacGuffin that will grant you new powers, like we see with the Chaos Emeralds. But if that's the case, why the hell can Ganondorf do this? Like, I get that from a game design perspective, it's meant to give him an intimidating and epic form, but even the game where we're given retroactive information on Ganondorf later, we don't see him do anything remotely like or similar to this. So what's going on here? There is nothing in Tears of the Kingdom that explains how on earth the Secret Stone was able to cause this, or why it doesn't happen to any of the other wielders we see in both eras the game takes place in. And comparing that to Breath of the Wild, where, before we even knew there would be a sequel, plenty of mysteries had bits of breadcrumbs where conclusions were being made, even if not the same, and weren't just pure speculation. All things considered, I could go on and on about how Tears of the Kingdom story does a disservice to Breath of the Wild story, and what the game tried to do with its narrative, but I'll save that for a full review of Tears of the Kingdom itself. Now, while this video is purely opinion based, I was hoping I might be able to find something regarding the writing process of Frontiers that would give insight as to what might be the reasons the game did as well as it did with its story, and if any official comments might suggest an inspiration. Now, while I didn't find anything for that second query, I did find some interviews from a member of Sonic team that at least acknowledge why Frontiers is this semi-open world game, or as they put it, an open zone game. In one interview with the creative officer, the Zelda series was explicitly acknowledged but not as an inspiration, only commenting that the dev team wanted to do something different from other open world games, mentioning how Sonic focuses on action instead of RPG elements like Zelda or AAA titles do. Now, I also want to touch on something that only occurred to me while I was writing the script for this video, which is how these games treat the history of their respective franchises. Now, neither of these two games were released as celebratory titles, but both do try to touch on the in-universe history of the franchises they come from. In Sonic Frontiers, the cyberspace levels take from Sonic's memory is of past locations, the most recurring locations being Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary. What makes these specific locations stand out just beyond their familiarity to the series is also that they're the first free zones from Sonic Generations, where you rescue Tails, Amy, and Knuckles in that game. Furthermore, when going through the side stories for each of these characters during the duration of the game, they'll reference prior events from previous games and actually touch on elements of these characters that for a very long time had seemingly been forgotten by the franchise, such as Amy being a fortune teller and using tarot cards, Knuckles being the last of his kind and guardian of the Master Emerald, which, side note, the last time that whole thing was brought up at any point was in fucking Sonic Chronicles, so whoop-dee-fucking-do there. And Tails wanting to rise out of Sonic's shadow and be his own hero. In a weird way, Sonic Frontiers does something the franchise doesn't usually do. It builds off pre-existing elements of its characters and lore as opposed to introducing new things, and even the things that are new that it brings in can be directly tied or linked to other parts of the series' history without feeling like a rehash or nostalgia bait for older audiences. Put this next to Tears of the Kingdom. It entirely introduces new lore that doesn't make a great deal of sense when you put it into the wider context of the franchise it's a part of, and a later attempt to give this lore greater significance and context only serves to muddy those waters even further. Whereas if you just changed the name of certain things in the game and made it its own standalone fantasy game, this story would make a lot more sense. But when in the context of it being a Zelda game, no matter where you think it fits in the timeline, it requires a lot of speculation and broad theories to make sense. And while I love fanfiction and fan theories, there is a point where you have to accept it shouldn't be up to fans to try and connect certain things that the writers should have already been doing themselves. Now again, I want to make it abundantly clear that despite the negative tone I've taken with Tears of the Kingdom, and the praise I've given Sonic Frontiers, these are neither perfect nor abysmal games. Tears of the Kingdom was a disappointment for me as a fan, yes, but I wouldn't have replayed the game multiple times if I thought it wasn't worth my time by now. As I mentioned before, I am a die-hard Zelda fan, so I was always going to make these kinds of connections between the two games as I did, and it's entirely possible that in this case, I've lost my marbles and I'm just seeing things that aren't there. But I want to leave you with this. Both a good and bad story will leave you asking questions. A good story will prompt questions of curiosity and wanting to know more. If it's particularly profound, it may make you question your own opinions on certain things. But a bad story will leave you questioning the writer, not the story. In a lot of ways, these games just aren't comparable. At least when it comes to the core gameplay, with Frontiers having a bigger focus on its combat and action, while Tears focuses on puzzle solving and exploration. So these games cannot be comparable in every aspect. And at the end of the day, they should still be treated as separate entities. Not like two siblings asking which one their parents love more, and you're allowed to like one over the other. Hell, you're also allowed to like bad things. Something like The Room would not have the cult fandom it does if it wasn't enjoyable in some capacity. But as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the stories and lore of both these games, for the first time since the 90s, Sega have done what Nintendo don't.
Hey everyone, Editor Flip here. Thank you so much for watching. I'm recording this just as I'm wrapping up the main recording of this. I've just finished editing the main bulk of the video, and I wanted to include this bit here just because there's some updates I want to give to the channel, like some proper updates, and not just wishful thinking that I'm putting in a pinned comment or anything. To start, I just recently graduated university, and that's sort of what had been taking up most of my time for the past 3 years, as I'm sure more consistent viewers will know. And I just wanted to get back into the swing of things properly, so I made this very short thing right after finishing Frontiers, just because of how much I enjoyed it, and was just thinking, I had all these thoughts and I just wrote them down, and it was enough to make a video out of. It's not a brilliant video, don't get me wrong, it's more just an opinion piece rant, more than anything else. Also, as you can probably tell, the audio quality has somewhat upgraded as well. That is because I am focusing more towards doing voice acting work, in between longer, bigger uploads, as well as just Twitch stuff overall. So I'm not recording this in the booth at the moment because I've not finished setting that up. But I have the microphone, I've calibrated it, and I'm almost done setting up a personal voice booth of mine in my old childhood bedroom. So hopefully the quality of my voice will sound a lot better going forward. As for where this channel's going overall, it's still going to be me uploading videos that I'm passionate about, videos I want to make, as opposed to trying to play to the algorithm, and it's something I'm going to try to avoid. If I hit the algorithm good, brilliant, I guess. But overall, this is a channel that, while I would like to have a career out of YouTube and everything, I want to do voice acting more than that. So it's going to be part portfolio, part what I want ever to make, whatever, as well as just stream highlights as well. In fact, I very recently returned to streaming. I played Sonic CD the other week actually, and I'm going to try and stream for a couple hours every week, maybe longer. It depends because I'm currently job hunting, so I've got more time to work on videos and stream at the moment. But that's not always going to be the case, and it could very quickly not be the case depending on how lucky I get with the current job market right now. But that being said, there's not going to be an upload schedule. I'm not going to hold myself to one video a month like I originally thought I could do. But I'm going to upload as frequently as I can, and just so long as I'm happy with whatever it is I'm putting out at the end of the day. There will be more voice acted bits, meme stuff, or just monologues and auditions, and maybe even a few comic dubs here and there. And if you're lucky, maybe even a few original, some stuff I've written myself. That's basically everything I wanted to say. I hope everyone has a good evening.